Everyone, it's Ailey Mills here, the Speaker for Confidence, and I have the joy, the delight, the pleasure of interviewing my good friend and colleague, Jane Adshead-Grant. We're going to be talking today about change and how change might affect you and influence you in your personal life and your career. But before we start, Jane, can I ask you to just give the good people who are listening in today an idea, a snapshot of what it is you do?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ailey, and I'm delighted to be here too once more. So my name is Jane, as you said, and I'm an executive coach facilitating independent thinking for those who want to achieve clarity, confidence, and creativity.
And that's our crossover. You know, when you agree to work with people and you have this kind of synergy that we have, this cooperative working that we are doing as we do the interviews, our common ground is confidence. So, Jane, can I ask you, when it comes to change, what have you discovered about adapting to change?
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity, because for me it's so front of mind right now, and I guess for me I've discovered a few things more recently. And the first thing that I've discovered about adapting to change is that it's all about mindset, Ailey. And when we can accept change as inevitable, it becomes so much easier. For example, what I discovered is that, in fact, change has been a constant companion through our life. You know, when we think of when we were young and we learnt to crawl and then we learnt to walk and then to run, and perhaps some of us who then learnt to ride a bike, our whole world opened up to us so that we could travel further and go and see our friends, or like me, I even rode my bike to school. So I think the funny thing is that although change is our constant companion, we sometimes see it as an interruption of certainty. And so whilst the change can be naturally difficult for some people, I think if we can learn that, if we can choose this mindset to embrace change, it becomes so much easier. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I have, you know, I'm known for giving little formulas and simple things and keeping things very simple. And I have what I call the RC syndrome. That's Romeo Charlie. RC syndrome, and I talk about that as the resistance to change. And people who suffer from the RC syndrome are really missing out on so many opportunities because they don't go out and discover, they don't adapt, and then they're missing out on opportunities in life.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, building on that, one of the things that I've also learned and discovered more recently is that, you know, it's not the fear of change itself that can stop us. It's rather our capacity or our perspective, if you like, on our capacity to deal with the change. And whether that's the actual process of change, or perhaps for some it's the outcome of change. But it always amazes me, Ailey, when, you know, people are put in difficult situations, how incredible the human mind, and in fact we as human beings can, in fact, when we adopt that attitude that you talked about and a more positive attitude of what's possible, that we really can adapt to situations.
Absolutely. And when it comes to individuals or companies and corporations, if they give people the right information, if they prepare them, if they hold their hands along the way, I actually feel that the vast majority of people are not resistant to change at all. What they are resistant to is change being managed very badly. But if you hold their hands along the way, they'll really surprise you, as you say, in what they can achieve. Yeah. However, there are some barriers. There are barriers they just pop up when people think about change. So what would you say are some of the barriers, Jane?
Well, for me, I think they are really, it's about this either resistance that you talked about and fear that I talked about. And for me, it's about expectation. So the three kind of key barriers to change, one being the expectation of loss. When people focus on what they may lose from going through the change process or what this change may show up. And the second thing is expectation of the process pain, i.e. how uncomfortable it's going to be to go through this change. And I think that often stops people from even getting started because they just worry too much about the effort it might require. And the third barrier, I think, is the expectation of the outcome pain. Again, they focus on, you know, what if it doesn't work? What if I don't feel good at the end of it? And so putting in these barriers before they've even started, I think sadly can sometimes result in that lovely RC formula that you talked about earlier.
Yes, and if people have this inner critic, if they're constantly challenging the loss, the pain, and the potentially poor outcome, then they never get started. And again, the way we see change, we embrace change and think, change is wonderful, and it's happening round about us. If you think of this conversation, you and I have changed only in a microscopic way, but in some way we have changed since we started this conversation. It's a natural biological thing. So, change is around us constantly, and it's rather foolish to resist it.
Absolutely. And I would also offer that one of the key benefits of change is that actually it eliminates boredom. In fact, I think that our mind and our brain actually requires change. It requires variety. And perhaps I can illustrate that with an example from my own life that, to be fair, I would say, and I think others would probably say, that I enjoy a routine, that I perhaps am certainly one who enjoys certainty and stability. And although, what I've learned and over the years is to become more adaptable to change, is that actually my mind really enjoys it. As a classic example, when I go to London and I found my favourite eatery, and I used to enjoy a certain soup. And I'd go for it every day. In the winter, I would try and see, every time I was in London, I'd go for that same soup. And one day I got there and it wasn't on the menu. And I was so disappointed. And I thought, oh, I'm gutted. Now what do I do? And in that moment, I had to adapt. There was nowhere else that sold this particular variety of soup because it was specific to that shop. So I had to change. I either went without or I chose something different. And boy, was I delighted. When I stepped into the mindset of it's inevitable, it's not always going to be on the menu, what else might there be? And so actually I discovered a new, completely different lunch break, a beautiful salmon salad, and I thought, wow, actually now my whole mind is open to the possibility of what the change could be. And more importantly, so could my body, and my system began to enjoy different types of nutrition from choosing a different lunch.
One of my talk titles is the pipeline of possibilities, and all of a sudden now I've got your story to do with choosing a different soup. That's fun. It really is fun. And it's interesting, when I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when companies would come to me as a speaker and they'd say, oh, we want you to talk about stress management. And I would say, well, I actually do stress prevention. I don't do stress management. And then all of a sudden it flipped, and stress prevention went out and it was change management. And a lot of people, change management and the management of stress are synonymous with one another. And, I think quite often people put themselves into stressful situations because of not being able to manage stress. So it was interesting how, as a speaker, I had to change quite a lot of words on my website, and yet actually I was talking about the same thing.
Wow.
So you have to manage a change even in your vocabulary. And that is on the menu as well. So to close off this lovely conversation, would you give us your 3 top tips for managing change, please, Jane?
Yeah, well, for me, it's, to your point just now, it's about considering change or consider the possibilities for growth as a result of the change. How could it benefit you? A bit like me. The second one I would say is get clear on what you want from the change. Now, of course, there are some times when you want to implement change yourself because you want to get different results. There are other times, as you talked earlier, Ailey, about change when you're in an organization and it's out of your control. But if you remember that mindset of change being inevitable, you're going to be better prepared. So when change is happening around you that's out of your control, ask yourself, what do I want from this change? And take hold of it, accept it, and be proactive in seeking out clarity for what you want from this change. And the third thing to finish up, I would say, is to review and celebrate. As you go through the change for yourself, whether it be your own initiated change or change within an organization, review the process and the outcome. What worked well for me and my team? And what would be even better the next time we were going through something like this? And don't forget to celebrate. Make sure that you celebrate your progress along the journey of change. And of course, when you reach the destination, a really big celebration. It's really important to make a stand and a mark, an anchor for the process you've been through, the effort you've put into it to achieve the change that you wanted for yourself.
And that brings us beautifully to a close. I would like to celebrate yet another successful conversation with you, and it's all about confidence talks. And thank you very much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your insights, Jane. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to just say my closing words, and then I'll let you finish off with yours. And so I'm Ailey Milnes. I'm the speaker for confidence, often known as Captain Positive. And I've had the pleasure of speaking to Jane Adshead-Grant, who's going to close off this conversation.
Ailey, well, thank you. It's a mutual feeling, and I too appreciate your insights and also your positivity. Every time we connect with each other, I just feel the energy, and I particularly appreciate that in you, Ailey. So this is Jane Adshead-Grant. I'm an executive coach facilitating your independent thinking for clarity, confidence, and creativity. So until the next time, it's goodbye from us both.